Hello and welcome to Japan Expert Insights and our Japanese Politics 101 room. Every Sunday, Timothy Langley, who runs a company in Tokyo that focuses exclusively on Japanese politics, government and public affairs, and host by Matsuoka, bring to you the latest developments in Japanese politics. In this podcast, we welcome comments, questions and opinions, so if you haven't done so yet, join us next time. In the meantime, you can find us at japanexpertinsights.com and our YouTube channel, where we upload all the conversations on Japanese politics, business insights, and Japan's role in the Indo-Pacific region. So, Timothy, hope that you're ready. So let's start.
Thank you very much. And I see that humor is going to be the hallmark of your new posture here in 2022. So, yes, it's been a kind of relaxed week. I've actually been off, as most everybody else has, so I haven't been up to speed as much as I usually am on the news reports, but there has been a lot going on in Japanese politics that I'd like to report to you. Let me bring you up to speed. So it's only been a week since we last met. There have been some things that are going on in the background. Mr. Kishida made his final, not quite a State of the Union, but he made a speech on the 30th and then closed up the year. Today is the 2nd. It will be quiet for 2 or 3 days, and then things will start up around the 5th. As you might remember, there's supposed to be a meeting of ministers of defense 5th of January, and so things will be moving in that direction. Actually, there's a lot to talk about defense-related today. In his policy speech, the Prime Minister talked about some of the challenges that he faces in 2022 and what he intends to do about them. But when you take a look at everything that is said and all of the forces that are being brought to bear on his administration and his background, he was the longest serving foreign minister, so he feels some strength and some acumen in that area. So you can anticipate that he's going to be exercising his skill in that particular area. And in fact, most of the issues, he does have domestic issues that are confronting him, but the really serious nation-building challenges are coming from external. So he's got security issues, not only economic security, but also geopolitical security that he needs to consider. For example, he started a economic security cabinet post, so he wants to be able to have the economics of Japan, how money comes in, how money is spent, how money is being generated, having it kind of wrapped up in a wrapper of protection, so that it can't be infiltrated, it can't be hacked, that sort of thing. Mizuho, by the way, just was hacked again. This is like the 3rd time, even after they promised the regulators that they wouldn't run into trouble again, but they just suffered a system failure just recently. So these kinds of things, there are a lot of things that are going on the security side that we don't even hear about. It doesn't hit the paper. As you know, the press here is tightly controlled, and you get the news that they want you to have. But with regard to security, his security strategy, he's been working on that. And these kind of decisions will be rolling out over the next couple of months as it becomes a little bit clearer. But you can anticipate that he's going to be leaning heavily on bolstering Japan's, security posture. And that is not just with economic security, it's also with the alliance between Japan and the United States primarily, but also with, the other nations in the region. So you might have noticed that Japan, South Korea, and the United States were somewhat successful this last week in coming to terms with some of the issues that are keeping Japan and South Korea further apart. They have an election of their prime minister coming up, and so there's a chance for things to go one way or the other, or to even be somewhat resolved. As you might remember, the South Koreans have decided that they're going to participate diplomatically in the Olympics in Beijing in 2.5 months. And that is different from what the United States, many of the G7, except for France, and Japan's policy is. Japan is not going to be sending a diplomatic delegation to that event. Finally, he's got the China challenge that he has to address. They're standing in a very tight spot because China is the #1 trade partner for Japan. And although the United States is really starting to be tougher, the Japanese are, like I said, they're in a difficult situation with trade, but they also have the supply train issue that they have to deal with. Internally, they've got Mr. Abe, who is he's not really a shadow cabinet minister, but he wields enormous power, and he is more harsh on China than the Kishida administration. And I think the story of Mr. Hayashi, the foreign minister, as being a little bit dovish is inaccurate, but that is the way he's portrayed. And so you have the Abe kind of team, which includes the chief policy secretary, Sanai Takaishi, who is in her role specifically because of Abe. You might remember that she's not of his faction, but he endorsed her rather than somebody from his faction as prime minister. He didn't endorse anybody in his faction to become prime minister. He endorsed her. She became chief policy secretary. And so he is kind of nailing Mr. Kishida for being soft on China. And she is also doing the same thing. She's kind of being a little bit hawkish now over this last week. And it's somewhat, you're beginning to see the lines being a little bit more defined. The other issue that Mr. Kishida is really going to try and come to terms with is how to deal with the two Koreas, how to, we saw a little bit of progress there this last week. And you can anticipate that there will be a lot more effort spent on that. But this year is going to be really, there's going to be a lot of challenges here. He also has, his new economic capitalism, his new capitalism theory that he's going to implement. He's making some progress there, but those are tough issues. So he's got a lot of things on his plate, and he's got the upper house election. So you will hear more and more about the upper house election you've already started to hear about it if you're watching the news, that they're starting to gear up for that. Anyway, I'd like to move on from there. If we've got other issues to talk about with regard to his administration and the challenges they face, we can deal with those. This issue of each Diet member having a budget of 1 million yen each month for travel expenses. Those expenses do not need to be represented by receipts. This is an additional 1 million yen that they get. They voted that in for themselves. It's been in process for a long time, at least the last 8 years. And it's, people don't spend a million yen every month for travel expenses. But they don't need to report it either. If you belong to a political faction, you can imagine that the faction bosses are saying, look, you can contribute that to the faction for your unused portions. And by the way, you wanted to travel to these areas, and as your faction headquarters, we actually administer your travel itinerary. So please don't do that. So there's a lot going on there. The budget was just passed last week, 2 weeks ago. And one of the budget items that didn't escape attention was the budget for not just this travel expenses domestically, but the travel expenses internationally. So there is another budget for members of the parliament to travel overseas. Not quite junkets, but they're called junkets, where you might get 2 or 3 members of the Diet. Usually it's a bigger delegation, maybe 6 or 12, who travel to different capitals of the world, typically over Obon. And that budget for 2019 was 562 million yen for the year. In 2019, there were 39 trips. I'm sure they consumed all 562 million yen of that budget in 2019. 39 trips does not mean 39 individuals. It probably means, maybe 150 or maybe even 200 members having traveled in those 39 trips. In 2020, there were 0 trips. Nobody traveled. There were no registered trips. And in 2021, there was only 1 registered trip. Nevertheless, this 562 million has been accumulated. And when the budget was passed this last time, it went through untouched. So it's really not great politics when the people find out that this kind of money is being storehoused for members to travel overseas. In fact, when I was working inside the parliament, I went on 2 or 3 of these junkets. They're not lavish, but they're typically a group of parliamentarians from the LDP, and you'll have a couple of people thrown in from Komeito or from some of the opposition parties. So it does serve a purpose of kind of helping these people be friendly to each other, have dinners, travel, talk about issues on a political basis to a foreign audience. So it does serve a good purpose there. I don't think it's too much abused, but the fact that this money is being still accrued I think can turn people off towards supporting the LDP. There are a lot of things that happen like that. For example, with Mr. Abe's administration, you might remember Sakura o Mirukai, which was the flower viewing party of the Abe faction. Just to recap that, every year in spring, the Shinjuku Gyoen, the big park at Shinjuku, was closed for one day, and Mr. Abe's faction reserved that for his own political party. It's very rare to do that. You can do that. It is a national park. And he reserved it, and you needed to have a ticket to get into the grounds. And then everybody who was friendly with Mr. Abe and some who were unfriendly also were able to get those tickets. This whole brouhaha was not related to the opening of the gates and the securing of the park. It is for the dinner that happened the night before. And the dinner that happened the night before is always at the New Otani Hotel, or was always at the New Otani Hotel. And it was for the real supporters of Abe, and a nice dinner, 4-course dinner, 2 wines, that sort of thing. Maybe 500 people. And the people who were invited might pay, but they might not pay. And in the 4 years before it became an issue, the total there was 30 million yen that was unaccounted for. So people would go to the dinner, they'd bring their wife, they'd bring some supporters. Maybe they would pay, maybe they wouldn't pay. And this became an issue. They investigated it. The secretary for the paid secretary for Mr. Abe was formally indicted for that. He was charged 1 million yen as a fine for this, but it didn't kill it. It just kept snowballing. And the public prosecutor's office, even while Mr. Abe was in the position of being prime minister, was also pursuing him. You might remember that he managed to keep the public prosecutor in position even after his retirement age, because he knew that the number 2 who was going to come up if this guy retired was against Mr. Abe and would really put the heat on for this particular one, not just this one. There were a couple of scandals going on, but Sakura Mirukai was pretty obvious. The receipts that were supposed to be kept by the New Otani somehow disappeared. But in any event, the court, it's not a court ruling, the public prosecutor's office was not going to prosecute Mr. Abe, and that upset a bunch of people about this time last year. They insisted on a reissue of the prosecution. They went through another investigation, and this week they came with their decision that they're not going to pursue it. And they're not going to pursue it because in the July inquest, although it was said, please reinvestigate, the public prosecutor's office came up with a decision not to prosecute. In July, they had a committee come up and they said, no, you must investigate again because it's too blatant. And they came up with their decision, the public prosecutor's office, on this last week, which was basically a middle finger, and said, look, the investigation, we have nothing new to show. It would be very difficult to prosecute the former prime minister. Gosh, the statute of limitations, they had like 16 different reasons. So once again, people who are following this sort of thing, and the voting public has this, this image of the LDP as big money, as they can do whatever they want. They can accumulate money for travels that they're not required to provide receipts on. It's just one of those things that turns people off. So in his policy statement, Kishida reported he's trying to create a distance and remove those negative legacies that his administration is saddled with. And a lot of that is he's talking under his breath about Mr. Abe. This last week, for example, remember the Abe masks, those really handsome masks that Mr. Abe ordered by the millions right at the beginning of the pandemic. They were very unpopular. The only person in the world who ever wore them was Mr. Abe. He did that very frequently in public to show his endorsement of that. But the shortage of masks was very short-lived, and in fact, all of the masks, the vast majority of them, sat in storage. So Mr. Kishida just this last week reported that those should be removed. No more masks. Let's get them out of storage. Let's destroy them. Let's turn them into something more useful. Something of a slap to Mr. Abe, but that was going to happen in any event. Nobody was interested in those masks. But you can see that Mr. Kishida is beginning to exercise a little bit more vigor in creating his own administration distinct from Mr. Abe's administration. And you can see that with his selection of Mr. Hayashi as his foreign minister and the elimination of Mr. Abe in some of the meetings he's having. We talked about that last week, some of these important policy meetings. So all that does is it just generates more animosity. And as we get closer and closer to the next election, this is going to come to a head. You remember that the election district where Mr. Hayashi comes from and Mr. Abe comes from, that needs to be melded together, and they're going to lose one member of parliament. And this fight between Mr. Abe and Mr. Hayashi is basically a fight between Mr. Abe and Mr. Kishida. And the forces are not completely aligned towards Mr. Kishida, so it could be a really good fight. It's going to be a good fight. There has been some suggestion that we push this away. We don't, when the election happens, we don't have to have one less member in Yamaguchi. But that fight is not upon us yet, but you will see the battle lines being more and more clearly drawn. So it's something to keep an eye on. We've talked about that in the past. I think we should probably continue to talk about it because I think every week there will be something that comes up that is like a little kind of a spat between Kishida and Mr. Abe on any broad number of areas. And it is, it's probably just a lining up of what happens after the first Kishida administration, who's going to run against him, and how is he going to do in the upper house election. And just to put a finer point on it, when the gerrymandering of the Yamaguchi is complete, it doesn't go into effect until there is an election of the lower house. So we have the upper house election in July. It doesn't mean that fight is going to happen then, unless for some reason there is a double election. Mr. Kishida decides to close down the lower house and there's a double election. That is not a foreseeable possibility at this point in time, but who knows, a lot can happen. You might also have noticed, if you're watching TV, that, gosh, it sure seems like there's a lot of companies that who do recruiting, who are advertising a lot, like Recruit, like Aspire, like there's a lot of recruiting companies that are actually making a lot of money and on national television, having spots and handsome actors from Johnny's Gym Show, promoting their recruitment services. This is unheard of, 10 years ago, 8 years ago, and the recruiting industry has really exploded because this stickiness, this wet relationship that employers and employees traditionally used to have. I don't know how really accurate that is. There's been a lot of studies on the reality of Japanese employment. The big companies somewhat resemble that, but the big companies, companies that employ, more than 100 people, that comprises, maybe 15 or 14% of the entire economy. So it's not the whole enchilada there. In any event, the jobless rate has shot up to 2.8%, which is not huge, but it's indicative of people feeling this wind of change and putting themselves out, quitting their jobs, and looking for another job. And this is a phenomenon that has really started to take a lot of energy from COVID. It has, people can't fire people because of COVID, even though the hotels and restaurants have done that. There's a supplementary budget for helping those people, helping those companies keep them on, even in light of having to let them go, or supplementing their income, even in the absence of a job. But the fact that people are voluntarily leaving their current position and looking for another job is something that people should take a look at, keep an eye on. So for every 100 people, there's 115 jobs available. So the recruitment companies, since it's a new technology, it's not a technology that the Japanese have traditionally been very good at. It's mostly come in from the Americans and from the Brits over the last 20 years. People who have made great careers here in Tokyo running recruitment companies, but the Japanese are now moving very swiftly into that market as well. So if you're looking for signs of things looking better, This jobless rate for people out looking for a job, most of them are doing this voluntarily. So that is a sign that people are perceiving that things are going to get much better. They're going to get a better job. They're going to stop what they're doing now and do something else. So I wanted to share that with you. On the other side, things that are not so great is the Japanese had an invasion drill for an island in Nagasaki over the last week. It was an exercise for Marine forces to take an island that is occupied by hostile forces. This is, I don't know if it's alarming, but it's maybe part of the reality. The Senkakus are the most disputed islands. They belong to Japan. They are disputed with a couple of countries. Korea and China also claim that. And it is the one place where, if there is going to be an action on islands, it might be the Senkakus. They have been disputed for a long time. And Japan doesn't typically have a expeditionary force. It doesn't have, the Marines and the rubber rafts and the Navy SEALs, that sort of thing. And they're beginning to develop that technology with the United States. They're in close cooperation there. It's not something that is actually authorized under the Japanese Constitution because it's not specifically defense related. It's actually offensive related. So this idea that we're always talking about, the revision of the Constitution, you can see the need for that in these kinds of things that are coming up. It's somewhat worrying, but it's something that is going to continue. We just need to keep our eye on it. And at some point in time, I predict within the next 6 months, the issue of the revision of the Constitution is going to come up. Finally, you might have noticed that they're going to reduce the age of maturity in Japan. You know that when the Japanese turn 20 years old, they become adults and they can smoke and drink. And, they have these huge parties. It's a national holiday, in fact. You turn 20, it's Seijinshiki. What do they call it? The, adult day, coming of age day. And the Japanese government has now determined that you can reach maturity not at 20, but let's move it to 18. This is interesting for a bunch of reasons. Typically, you could get married, you could be convicted of certain crimes, even charged as an adult in certain circumstances, but you couldn't vote, you couldn't drink. There are a lot of restrictions on, being an adult, 20 years of age. They're changing that now to 18, and it's interesting that they would do that. So you can imagine for people who are living in Japan, when they have this coming of age day, all of the kids are wearing kimonos, and it's just a huge issue. Sometimes it becomes a citywide management issue with the kids driving the cars and just being a little bit wild and drinking. But can you imagine the next time they have this coming of age day, when you've got not just the 20-year-olds, but the 19 and the 18-year-olds? That will be a huge issue. It'll happen, I guess, just once. But the next time they have that coming of age day, it should be, all the kimono shops are going to have a heyday. The interesting thing about changing the age of maturity is that it impacts a lot of things. It's actually doesn't include drinking and gambling or smoking, even though you're 18 and you are considered to be a mature adult. They're going to reserve that. But in terms of voting and that sort of thing, it's a pretty significant issue. When you think about the revision of the Constitution with the report that I just had on this drill about protecting a Japanese island from people who have taken over that island, and you compare that with the coming of age and 18 years old and potentially conscription of Japanese individuals into the military forces should the need arise, you can begin to appreciate the challenges that Mr. Kishida has with regard to not just China and the domestic issues, but also with the revision of the Constitution and all of the things that involves, not just the budget, but also social issues too. So there's a lot going on. There's a lot on his plate. We can anticipate a lot of change coming up between now and this time next year. In 12 months, there's just an enormous amount that's potentially going to happen. And I should reflect on that when we meet this time next year about all of the things that have happened. I didn't prepare for that this time because this is only our, what is this, Maya? This is our 47th, 48th time?
The 47th.
Wow. So on an annual basis, we don't have a pattern set up, but going back over the year and what has happened and what we didn't anticipate would be a kind of interesting, reflective thing to do as a team, as a group.
Yes.
With that, I'd like to close it up. I'm sure there are a lot of things that I missed, but please come up to the room and help me here, please. Thank you, Maya.
Thank you, Timothy. Yes, you mentioned that the challenges during this new year for the Kishida cabinet will be more external than internal. And I wonder whether you meant the balance between, the balancing role of Japan in the confrontation between China and the United States. Or did you have other things in mind?
Okay, that's a great question, and I hope it's not taken out of context. What I meant by that statement is that the external issues that confront Mr. Kishida and the Kishida administration in Japan are nation-threatening. The internal issues, for example, COVID, the budget, the economy, supply stream, chips and condensers, and the automobile industry, they are not as nation-defining as the external moves. So that's why I'm saying that in this year, what the prime minister intends to do or what he's able to achieve is not without a reflection on what's going on externally. And no matter what he does, how superb he runs his foreign policy with his best friend, Mr. Hayashi, and I think they'll do really well there. I think he'll put a lot of effort into that area. It's an area that he has great skill and expertise in, probably not so much domestically, so he needs to have a good hand on the domestics as well. But no matter how well he does that, he still has to deal with his alliance partner under the Joe Biden administration. So that's something of a I don't know if I say it pejoratively, I apologize, but it's something that he can't control and he can't quite manage in the Biden administration. I mean, they have their rules and their strategic plans, but I think Japan as well will go through a revision of its strategy, militarily and domestically as well. So it's hard to say.
Yes, there are external factors which the Kishida cabinet and Mr. Kishida himself cannot control, and sometimes they are difficult even to predict. But also, that's in terms of external policies and, let's say diplomacy. But at the same time, internally, we know pretty well what the challenges are to the
Right.
government. There have been other challenges, and we know that some of them will be the decentralization of the economy, probably decentralization of the agriculture, advancing digitalization, also supporting agriculture, the agricultural sector here. But in addition to these, if you have any other information at the moment about what else they can, or they probably are talking about behind the curtains, it will be interesting to hear that too. Timothy.
And I apologize to the audience for this. I don't know if it's where I'm standing or why my connection is so poor. Sorry, I can't respond to the question because I didn't quite catch the question. But if you're talking about the dichotomy between the challenges he has domestically and the challenges the prime minister has externally, he's got huge domestic issues, the revitalization of the economy, but not just the revitalization of the economy. It's his new way of even conceiving of what the economy is, his new capitalism. And that's going to be a big deal for him. He wants to separate himself from the shadow of Mr. Abe. So the arrows of the Abe administration. And you'll remember that it was revealed in Diet hearings that the numbers were cooked for so many years. The construction industry numbers, as reported by the Ministry of Construction, have been cooked to make the economy look better and the GDP look better. So there's a lot going on in the background there too.
Yes, and I wonder, so there seems to have been a Kyodo News poll recently about the government and the approval rate, and I mean the approval rate has shot up to 60%. or so, which is really a great improvement compared to what happened to the previous Prime Minister, Mr. Suga.
Yes.
And I wonder, okay, what are the factors who impacted this improvement then?
Well, I think part of it is the 100-day honeymoon.
Okay.
So typically in a new administration, a new prime minister, he has a honeymoon of about 100 days. And the same thing in the United States and in a lot of other democracies, that when there is a new administration, people give it a little bit of a breather. They let them find their legs and establish their administration. And in fact, I think Mr. Kishida has projected a good image, a strong image. He's made a couple of mistakes. He's getting hammered for those mistakes. You know, for example, the distribution of supplementary money for people who have children, that was flip-flopped. You know, the entrance examination flip-flop. You know, if you don't have COVID inoculation, then you can't take the test. You can't sit in the entrance exams. Just some flip-flops like that. But I don't think they're very serious. I think they're just people understand that he's not only is he looking for his way forward, but he also has detractors. People understand this topic that we're frequently talking about with Mr. Abe and his faction, and how large it is and how much power he still wields.
Mr. Kishida is compared to Mr. Abe much more often than to Mr. Suga, which is also interesting. When we talk about, you know, how he's presented in the news, or also about the news which come out about him and his government. So, of course, Mr. Suga had that just 1 year term, which was not that long actually for him to do much in terms of policies, strategies, and so on. But still, it's interesting to see how well the critiques compare Mr. Kishida to Mr. Abe. Hiroko, so let's see.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning. Thank you for having me up on the stage.
Happy New Year.
Happy New Year to you. My question is about document transportation expenses. I don't know how to say it in English, but 文書交通費 you're talking about. They didn't reach that agreement during that extraordinary diet session last year. The reason, my understanding is that LDP proposed that let's agree on just that instead of a monthly payment, it goes to a daily basis, like similar to the per diem payment. But Ishin no Kai and the opposing party disagreed because they demand to present the receipt and other documents. So they didn't reach the agreement. But I think that they should agree on just on a daily basis, the per diem similar type, and then move to that next step to discuss that document receipt and other requirement. I think that's why didn't they, go for it as LDP proposed, because they didn't agree. They didn't have reached anything at the end of the day, so they still continue to spend a lot of money on that. So I was wondering why they didn't agree. The LDP promised that they discuss once that they agreed on that payment, the daily, then they will have another opportunity to discuss on that receipt and other document requirements. So I was wondering why is that?
So yeah, that's a great question. Thank you very much. And it also, please also reflect on the report about Sakuro Mirukai. You know, what it suggests is that they can do whatever they want to do, and nobody can hold their feet to the fire. Even the public prosecutor is somewhat powerless to pursue an investigation because they have so many excuses why not. Here, with the receipt of money for each member of the parliament to receive that amount of money, they're the ones that are going to vote on that. And can you imagine them voting not to receive that money since they've been receiving it for the last couple of years? It's a very difficult challenge for them. The greatest thing about Ishin no Kai and the opposition parties, Ishin is kind of an opposition party. It's not the LDP, but they are similar in many respects to policy positions that the LDP holds. But they are pointing out, you would think that it would be Komeito who was saying this. it would be Komeito, the Clean Government Party, that points these things out, but it doesn't. It's one of these parties that's an upshoot that's beginning to really build some momentum, that is pointing out the fallacies, the things that the LDP shouldn't do, and there are lots of those. It's just that the LDP has a real stranglehold on communications, on media, and so I think the public does not appreciate all of the topics. But I think that's always the danger that the LDP confronts, is that they do things, a lot of things under the table. They're big business. The big businesses get it, the rich people get it, the poor people and the regular Joes don't get it. And I think that is being pointed out by Ishin and some of the other opposition parties. I think that they will still talk about it. They might do a per diem, but it's going to be the same thing. They're still going to be able to pocket the money without showing receipts. That's my prediction.
So you are saying that LDP is caught between the Komeito and the other opposition party?
No, I think Komeito should have been raising this issue beforehand, but they were convinced, to be quiet about it and not to make a big issue of it.
Because they are the coalition party.
Because they're in the coalition.
Okay.
And there's always I'll do something for you if you do something for me, and don't say anything about this. Please don't say anything about Sakura Mirukai. Please don't say anything about the Hyakumayan each month. And in that scenario, you stay in the coalition, you get a cabinet position, you get a committee post, that sort of thing. And that's how it's all decided.
Okay. Thank you.
But I mean, if you have better insight on that, I'd be glad to hear about it. But I think it's just one of those issues that it flares up and then it's taken care of, because if you can be quiet about that, Ishin no Kai, don't mention that issue as vocally as you did before, as we move into the election cycle. And if you do that, then we will give you concessions on issues that are important to you. So it's all horse trading.
Okay. Thank you so much.
I wonder about going back to the Sakura Mirukai. So you mentioned that the 3 million yen disappeared. And I wonder, it was not accounted for in receipts. But is that money which comes from the LDP, or is it money which comes from the budget?
Okay, that's a great question. And it's not 3 million, it's 30 million.
Oh, 30 million, I'm sorry for my mistake. Yeah. Okay.
And it's only 30 million if you're using a broken calculator. So the real amount is undetermined, because the receipts that should have been accrued by the Hotel New Otani have been disappeared. And the money was paid by, so there's the election campaigning law. You're not supposed to do certain things in order to promote yourself. You can't be buying liquor for people who vote for you. You can't be doing, there's a lot of different rules and regulations. And this is the violation. That's the law that the Abe faction is being accused of violating. So apparently it is the money that is collected by the Abe faction which paid for that. But since he was prime minister, it is unclear now if it was just the money, if it was the Abe faction, which was at that point the Hosoda faction.
Yeah.
If the money that was required to cover the deficit of what was collected at the door and what was billed by the New Otani was paid for by the Hosoda faction or by the LDP. So there's a huge controversy about that. And also, the person who would really know that answer is Mr. Nikai and Mr. Abe. And that's why that fight between Mr. Abe and Mr. Nikai was also so delicate. Because Mr. Nikai, he knows where all the skeletons are, not just with Sakura Mirukai, but with regard to lots of different issues as well. This fight between, him and Mr. Abe and Mr. Mori, that's why it was so delicate, because people have the goods on you. And somebody in that kind of power politics, it's easy to kind of trip things up. So it's a delicate game. But anyway, it is unclear where that money came from.
Indeed, because usually we hear there is a scandal, and there is a problem with the money, where it went, and who actually pocketed it. But we don't know the details why the scandal exists. That's why, to me, I didn't follow that scandal very closely, so it was unclear why the problem existed.
Well, you remember in Kyoto they had the election and the money was being distributed there,
Right.
and the husband and wife team, right?
Yes.
So where that money came from is also undetermined, but it points very clearly to Mr. Abe and to the Hosoda faction. But that issue also has kind of been buried. The amount of money there, I think, was about 3,000 man. So that's about 30 million. That's also
yeah. No, that's more.
a large amount of money that's going for political, for buying votes, actually. And then that issue just kind of died away, unfortunately. Maybe Hiroshi has something to shed light on.
Maybe, yes. Good morning, Hiroshi, and Happy New Year to you.
Happy New Year, Maya-san and Timothy-san. Happy New Year. I have a question, two questions. One is how do you evaluate the new policy which is launched by Kishida administration very recently? Number one, increasing of the defense expenditure over 1% of the GDP, and number two, the economic
That's right.
security. He just initiated a new post, ministerial post for the economical security. So how do you evaluate these two major policies launched by Kishida administration? And number two, what do you think about the Japan should or the I've just read about the article which is posted by Nikkei Shimbun in very recently. United Kingdom or UK is sending some wink that the Japan might be the joining the one of the alliances of the Five Eyes. So, what do you think about the possibility,
right,
or the prospect of the joining Five Eyes of Japan?
You asked what my evaluation is of the defense expenditure rising. Another couple of percentage points over the last couple of years, and we talked about that last week. And then you also asked about Japan's inclusion into Five Eyes, and as Maya said, a sign of the times. And I think there's been this constant push for Japan to want to establish itself. It's the third largest economy in the world. What in the hell? How come, from a Japanese perspective, how come we have to rely on a foreign country to defend our national interests? What the hell is with that? How come we have to pay to have somebody else provide that service for us? It feels like we are still occupied and dominated by a foreign country. And for any Japanese person who has a feeling of patriotism, that is distasteful, I would think. And I think this movement, the Japan of a pacifist constitution, as opposed to a Japan with defensive capabilities and offensive capabilities, that's a huge, huge difference. And a lot of social things need to change in order to accommodate a change in the constitution like that. And in fact, I believe that we are moving in that direction, as you can see from the increase in the defense expenditures, the United States pushing Japan to be paying more of their fair share, finger quotes. This comes up all the time. What's going on in Okinawa? It's a huge issue that just recurs over and over and over again because it's out of nature. There's a balance that nature is attempting to establish, and it's out of kilter. You've got the change of the age of maturity from 20 years old to 18 years old, and you can kind of imagine or anticipate a change of the constitution that allows for defensive capabilities of Japan commensurate with what it has as geopolitically and economically is the third most economically viable country in the world, that they would have their own defense capabilities, which would mean that young Japanese boys need to be conscripted into a military, and that is just so far out of anybody's conception right now. But if Japan continues to move in that direction, as with Israel, with South Korea, with the United States, not so much the United States as a conscription, but with a lot of countries where the military is more dominant, plays a more dominant role in society, not so much in the economy, but in society, to have soldiers in uniforms and people aspiring after they finish high school to become in the Air Force or the Marines, that sort of thing.
I think that we need to factor in also the the perception of the general population, the political leaders, the party, LDP, they push for changes in the constitution, and obviously for, let's say, increase in the military budget, also increase in the, if I can say, patriotic feelings among the population, maybe, but I can't see that happening without a change in the education here. And everybody I talk with here, my Japanese friends and family, everybody says we don't want to be part of a military conflict, whatever happens. So probably we need to also factor in this gap between the political elite and the general population. So I don't know, Hiroshi, how you feel about it. And
Oh, thank you, Maria-san and Timothy-san.
No, you're welcome. I just wonder what your opinion on this is, because as somebody who has a family here and somebody who has been living, I guess, in Japan after the Second World War in peace and prosperity, do you feel like there is, the people of Japan will be happy to proceed to go further with, with the policies of the Liberal Democratic Party? And of course, we know that the politicians don't really listen that much to the population and what the population says, but at the same time, it matters in a number of indirect ways. Hiroshi-san, what do you think about this? Are you
Okay,
happy with this?
I would not like to focusing on this defense issue because it's very sensitive,
Right.
and it will take a long time to discuss about it. Yes, and I just want to know how the Timothy-san is evaluating the two major issues. Do not focusing on the defense side expenditure only.
Right.
The new policies launched by Kishida administration, and the relation between Five Eyes and Japan, and how do we react to the sending other wing guys from United Kingdom or the allies of the Five Eyes. So that's what I want to know from Timothy-san.
Thank you. And I apologize for popping in and out. I don't know what it is about my connection today. This is strange and quite unusual. We've never had it this bad. But I'm really straining not to make a value judgment, but just rather an analysis of how things tend to be building up. But it is a very, very delicate issue. Changing the Constitution, going from a pacifist Constitution to one that is a little bit more robust militarily is a huge issue. And it's a very passionate issue. So I'm very, very careful about what I say about it. But it does seem to me, and in fact, the Kishida administration appears to be less hawkish than the Abe administration was. But given the geopolitics, all you need are a couple of things to happen. And things can turn around very, very quickly. In this country, things can change very quickly because like Maya said, the administration, the government moves at a different pace than the public. But the administration can also pretty much guide public perceptions and public opinions. And so it could be very quick. Things can happen very quickly here, as they have in the past.
And I also wonder, well, in the geopolitics room with Dr. Nagy, the general consensus there is that, all the players in the region and also the powers in other parts of the world, they are not working towards, let's say, containing China. They're working towards engaging China in economic policies so that those ties, economic ties, actually keep the balance, the power balance here in the region. So, and Japan is going to, to be one of the countries which needs to weigh in.
Right.
Yes.
Yeah. The question is it a policy of appeasement or is it a policy of confrontation?
Right.
And Stephen Nagy, if you're not plugged into his room every other Monday, you should. But yes, it seems to be with the power of China that the better strategy is, play along, try and not bring it into a confrontational issue, because as we've seen, when the Chinese are confronted, even in terms of wording and colors of maps, they react very, very strongly.
All my questions are related to the crisis of Taiwan crisis, and which is the conspiracy of the Chinese the Communist Party. So I think these policies launched by Kishida's administration, I just very appreciate it and supporting his policies. And of course, I'd like to. I'll be more than happy to join the Monday.
Yeah.
Every Monday or
Every second Monday.
every second Monday.
Yeah.
Every second Monday.
Yes. The next session is on Monday, January the 10th. So not tomorrow,
Okay.
but the week after. Ken? Good
Hello.
morning, Ken. Happy New Year.
Yeah, good morning from, yeah, I do. Good morning from Singapore. I have just one quick question. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. My question is about your view on the relation between central government in Japan and the regional prefecture government, maybe the governors. The reason I ask is I'm stuck in Singapore for the last 2 years, but I was lucky to be in Japan for 1 month in November and caught up with my old friend. And one of my friends told me that Fukui-san, now things are so messed up with COVID, and the prefectural government, or the people on the ground in municipalities, they have such a distrust to the central government, how they handle COVID issue and the Tokyo Olympic. And they even feel that the central government malfunctioning or dysfunctioning on certain issues. So my question is how, if this COVID and the Tokyo Olympic changed any way the relation between the central government and the prefectural governors. And as I lived in U.S. before, I remember that there was many cases about state governors becoming a president of the United States. So it just came to me that the distrust may sort of create the way for prefecture governors who is doing a good job in controlling COVID. Maybe later somehow make a way into central government to be a prime minister. Or maybe it's different. U.S. is a presidential system and Japan is a parliamentary system. So I'm just wondering if Timothy or Maya has any view on this topic. Thank you.
I caught most of that. And by the way, Ken, thank you very much. Is this the first time for you to be in the room?
I think second time. I would love to come, but the 1 hour difference, the time difference. This room opens very early in Singapore.
Yeah, sorry. You have a very distinctive voice, and I appreciate you being in the room. The tension between the prefectural government and the central government with regard to COVID, I think, is basically tied to funding. I don't know if you were in the room last week, but we had the issue with Okinawa and Denny Tamaki, governor of Okinawa, and his confrontation with the central government on the relocation of the Marine Air Base from Futenma to Henoko. And since he's not really playing ball the way that the central government insists that he does it, they've reduced the amount of funding for economic development for Okinawa. So I think the central government, the bureaucracies in particular, under the guidance of the ministers, sometimes play pretty hardball and are not as generous with the funding, although they insist that the local governments implement the policies that are decided in Tokyo. And I think that's where the tension really lies, that the central government says, this is the testing you need to do, these are the facilities you need to have, these are the kinds of nurses and the doctors to do the administration. And the requirements are there, but there's no assistance, and probably there's just a hammering of threats and penalties for not meeting objectives, that sort of thing. I think that's where most of the tension lies.
Interesting. Okinawa, I didn't mention the US-based issue. Just to add one more thing is that when I met with my old friend, one of the guys even told me that, Fukui-san, this is almost like a Onin no Ran desu yo. And those who don't know about Onin Ran, the Civil War started in Japan in the history from 1467. They had some small succession problem of the shogun of Muromachi. And then somehow the war started and it lasted 11 years. And that's sort of a beginning of the Sengoku Jidai. So I was surprised to hear my old friend who's actually involved in the regional government, prefectural government, who even said it's almost like Onin no Ran, they don't trust the central government. So I was just curious if there has been a big change in concept, perception about the central government by the prefectural people. Thank you.
Interesting observation. I think that comment is more accurate when talking about what's going on in the United States today, which is far more divided than and fractious than Japanese politics. Japanese politics is totally dominated by the LDP, as the last election really revealed, and the force and vigor and inspiration of the opposition parties is just so small and so meek that it doesn't look anything like what your friend was suggesting, that the accumulation of power in the central government in Tokyo is of such magnitude and is so distasteful that the local prefectures and the association of governors and the association of municipal mayors has come out in force to criticize it. That just hasn't happened. And it hasn't happened for a lot of different reasons. But I think, one of the reasons that the LDP has got a political machine that makes sure that people are put in positions of power and influence. And we're going to see this coming up with the election of governor in Okinawa this summer. So Denny Tamaki is up for election, and the LDP has already said that, we're going to work to get somebody in there who is more malleable, more, working hand in hand with the central government. And by restricting the economic development funds, Mr. Tamaki becomes a little bit less popular when he can't get the roads and the bridges and the construction budget for economic development going, reduced by 10%. So that does have an impact, and has an impact on voters too.
But at the same time, I think that it's important for us to say that not every prefecture has the same problem as Okinawa. And that different prefectures, they have different needs and different expectations, and they need different policies for development as well, which also means that they need different budget allocated to them. Well, Okinawa is very specific, right? And I think that because it's so specific, it is in the news, and because, of course, we've got the American base there, so we tend to go back to that, to the confrontation there and so on. At the same time, we need to remember that Japan has 47 other prefectures, and they actually are quite different from what Okinawa is. So I don't know. It's always good to think about, a little bit in a little bit more detail, rather than lump all the prefectures together.
Yeah, that's true. But you also see this, in the United States, they have this revolving door kind of scheme of people going into politics, and then they come out and they join the private sector, and then they go back into politics. They call that the revolving door. Here in Japan, you don't have so much of a revolving door. In fact, there is basically no revolving door here. But what you have is kind of a regurgitation. You have people who go into Japanese politics, and then they continue in Japanese politics in a different vein. So, for example, the most successful candidates for governors in the prefectures are people who have already been in the Diet. So the people who are LDP members have a better chance. They might be identified as a potential candidate in a prefecture that is having difficulty. They've got maybe an independent candidate, or somebody who is an incumbent governor there that is not, playing the game the right way. And the LDP puts together a candidate list and a selection process to defeat that particular governor. So I think the LDP has this long-term strategy in place, so that at least the governors and some of the mayors of the major municipalities are LDP friendly, or maybe even coming from the LDP in previous administrations.
Yeah.
So it's interesting to watch, and that's why the elections and the by-elections are so important.
Indeed. And there is dynamics there, which sometimes is difficult to predict. Sometimes it's very obvious. So
that means that we never had a prime minister who used to be a governor. Is that true?
No, that's not true.
Can't think of any.
From Kumamoto. Kumamoto, he was governor of Kumamoto, and he ran in parliament, and I believe his name escapes me now, but I believe he was governor.
細川さんかな。
Hosokawa.
Ah, from Kyushu.
Yes.
Okay. Also, there's some
Yeah.
exception, but as you described, the system that they pick, the
They
weighing
pick and
for
choose. That's
governors.
right.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. Well,
And
thank you very much.
there are several prominent LDP members or members of the parliament who have gone to governorships too. So it's a good. Yamamoto Ichida is the person who comes to mind right now,
Okay.
who was prominent, and I don't know if he was potential prime minister candidate, but he left the lower house to become governor maybe 10 years ago. So it does happen pretty frequently.
And you're talking about the LDP, no? Not about Ishin or
That's right.
Yoshimura
That's right.
or the Koike-san from Tokyo may become a prime minister. It's in a different dynamics. No? Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you. You never heard me say that, though.
No, but we never know because Miss Koike, once her term as governor of Tokyo is over, she may resurface as a major figure in national politics. Who knows?
Well, since it's politics, you just never know. It's hard to predict, and it's just really hard to predict. So that's why this kind of a room is so important, because at least keeping on top of things, you have a little bit better balance and understanding of what is happening and why it's happening and what could possibly happen. But once again, it's politics, so you need to buckle in.
Things change
Yes.
pretty quickly when there is a crisis, or even if there isn't any. But okay, well, with this, we wish you a great year ahead, also a beautiful day. Enjoy the second day of this year, and we're looking forward to having you again next week. This was Japan Expert Insights Room on Japanese politics. Thank you for coming and staying with us today. We will be on air next Sunday at 8:30 in the morning, Japan time again, so join us. Until then, you can find us at japanexpertinsights.com and our YouTube channel, where we upload all the conversations on Japanese politics, business insights, and the role of Japan in the Indo-Pacific region. If you want to stay informed about our upcoming events, you can follow us on Clubhouse, LinkedIn, and Facebook. Again, we're looking forward to your joining us next week. Until then, stay well and enjoy every day as much as possible. See you!